Well, Treasurer Jim Chalmers is working hard to spin some positive PR out of yesterday's grim economic data after the coalition slammed Labor's record spending, which is driving inflation and keeping interest rates high. Here's Peter Dutton.
Families are going backwards under this government. Inflation remains high and therefore interest rates will stay higher for longer. Why? Well, the Reserve Bank Governor has made it very clear the government continues to spend money in a wasteful way, and that's holding up inflation for longer, and that's why interest rates will stay higher for longer.
And here's the Treasurer's measured, sensible reply.
So we get a lot of free advice from our political opponents and from their sycophants and suck-ups that we should have some kind of slash and burn budget with radical austerity. That's a recipe for recession.
That sounded to me like a man under pressure. Not as much pressure as Anthony Albanese, mind you, and not as much pressure as everyday Aussies trying to pay their bills, but that was a tetchy response. Let's bring in a very relaxed and calm Perth Mayor, Basil Zempilas, and LNP MP Andrew Wallace. Basil, Jim Chalmers has promised the mid-year budget won't be a major cash splash, but what happens to our already weak GDP figures if we don't have the government's reckless spending to keep propping us up?
Well, we know where they'd be, don't we? And he's getting cranky, the Treasurer, and cranky means, and he's normally pretty mild-mannered, that means all is not well, or certainly the attention that he is under and Australia's financial position. He is bearing the brunt of responsibility for it, as he should. He is the Federal Treasurer. We know that productivity is down. We know that Australians' standards of living have fallen off a cliff. We know that household bills have gone up. And we know that the Australian Federal Public Service has grown by around about 25,000 people in Labor's period. So this spending is not the right way to address the Australian economy. And sooner or later, it is going to become a major problem. It's already at that point. And frankly, if they're the sorts of responses that the Treasurer is giving to sensible, well-meaning questions, well, perhaps it suggests he's out of answers.
Yeah, well, it certainly suggests he's out of his depth. Andrew, the only sector of the economy that's growing is the public sector, as Basil pointed out. The Commonwealth Public Service has grown by 26,000 permanent staff since Labor came to power. The Commonwealth now has 365,000 employees with an annual wages bill of $37 billion. And guess who pays for that? If you guessed you and I, you'd be correct. This government is building bureaucracy while business just dwindles, isn't it?
Well, that's right, James, and thanks for having me on. Of course, this is true to form for all Labor governments who always believe in big spending, big bloated bureaucracy. We have had an explosion of public servants working in Canberra. And, of course, we've had more than 1 million immigrants coming into the country. And really, that's the only thing that has kept the economy on life support rather than being stone motherless dead. But when I get around and talk to people in my electorate and everywhere else in Australia apart from Canberra, people are doing it very, very, very tough. The cost of living on families has been so incredibly significant. We've now, the national account figures that were released just a couple of days ago identified now 7 consecutive quarters of negative growth. It's the longest period in Australian history of negative growth for households, and it really just demonstrates how tough people are doing. But if people are in small business, they're getting a double whammy because not only have their cost of living significantly gone up, but the cost of doing business for small business, gas, electricity, insurance, they've all gone skyrocketing as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, Labor have got problems everywhere. Who would have imagined back in 2022 that Labor might be a one-term government and that part of the reason for that would be, can you believe it, salmon? Labor heavyweights have warned the Prime Minister that if they shut down salmon farming in Tasmania to save the Manguin skate, so beloved by inner-city Greens, they won't have an office to return to after the election. Basil, it's not like the PM doesn't have enough on his plate right now without adding salmon, of all things, to it.
Haven't got many right, have they? And there must be some soul searching, even if it's not audible or even if it's not conversations that they're having aloud. They must wonder to themselves, how did we get from where we were nearly 3 years ago to this point where we're hanging in by a thread? And the latest opinion polls, we know what they're suggesting. I think there's been such a contrast in styles from the leaders. We know that Peter Dutton, I've said this many times, not trying to win a popularity contest, trying to win an election. And his philosophy about achieving that has been stand for what you stand for, make it clear, be big and bold, and let the Australian people make the choice. And by contrast, the Prime Minister has been flimsy and wishy-washy, been on some positions, been off others, and hasn't been able to get one to stick. So there is a clear contrast. We're going to have an election in the first half of next year, and right now, Peter Dutton really starting to look like a winner.
Yeah, well, Andrew, Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek isn't exactly helping. She's made a mess of the McPhillamy gold decision, and now she's making a mess of Tasmania's salmon industry. She's put off a decision about the industry until after the election, leaving more than 5,000 people who rely on the industry for their livelihoods in limbo. I mean, you just can't lead like that. In fact, that's not leadership at all.
No, absolutely. And I agree with all the comments that have been said tonight so far. You know, there's 5,100 workers that stand to lose their jobs in Tasmania and the salmon industry. And you've got Tanya Plibersek, who is consistently trying to appeal to the inner city elites in Melbourne and Sydney, and really not looking after, and also in my electorate as well, the fishing industry, that the damage that she's caused. In my electorate in Fisher, we're the largest wild-caught tuna fishery on the eastern seaboard of Australia, and she has locked up so much of the fishing grounds that we're seeing unprecedented numbers of boats that are no longer going to sea because it's just not viable for them anymore. So it's not just salmon in Tassie, it's also tuna around the east coast of Australia, and that's because of Tanya Plibersek.
Well, Andrew, with all of this, it should come as no surprise, or maybe it does, I don't know, that polling released just a couple of hours ago has Peter Dutton on track to win the election next year. The Redbridge poll released just, as I said, a couple of hours ago in News Corp papers projects the coalition ahead in 64 seats, ahead of Labor on 59, with 14 seats remaining too close to call. Basil, I remember when the experts used to assure themselves that Peter Dutton was unelectable. Is this a case of cometh the hour, cometh the man? Because all of a sudden, Peter Dutton's got his nose in front.
It feels that way, doesn't it? And, you know, I think often in observing Australian politics, no opposition leader ever really looks like a premier or a prime minister. But then when they are, they quickly bed in. And I think that's the relationship that Peter Dutton is enjoying with the Australian population at the moment. I mean, they see him for what he is. He doesn't try and be something that he's not. He makes his agenda and his philosophies very clear. He sticks to them, and he has given the sort of conviction leadership forward as an option for the Australian public that they are looking for. And when you contrast Anthony Albanese's style over the last 3 years, nice enough fella, good bloke. I think he's a genuinely good bloke. I think he's a good, honest, decent Australian. But he hasn't got the politics right in this 3-year term. And by contrast, the option that Peter Dutton has put forward, strong, bold, this is what I stand for. People have a choice. And at the moment, I'm not surprised to see the polls leaning his way.
Yeah, well, Andrew, just quickly, Labor have said that at the next election, they're going to target Peter Dutton's quote-unquote unlikability. But it's the shine that seems to have come off elbow that's the real problem, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah, look, I think Peter is appealing to people because of his strength. I think that the Australian people are looking for strong leadership right now. What they've seen over the last 2.5 years with the Prime Minister has been utter, ineffective weakness, and the way that he has, been totally distracted on things like The Voice, when average Australians and small business is doing it so tough with the cost of living. They haven't concentrated on basics, like getting the fundamentals right, trying to assist our economy. Our economy's going backwards at a great rate of knots. People are doing it tough, and people are comparing the weakness of Anthony Albanese with the strength of Peter Dutton. Look, I don't want to come out this early in the blocks and say that, we're going to win the next election. I'm not going to say that, because it's a Herculean task that waits ahead of us. There's only ever been one-term government in Australian political history at a federal level, and that was back in 1931. We need to win 21 seats to win majority government. So it's a Herculean task, but Peter Dutton is up to the job, and we will support him every step of the way.
Well, he's certainly making all the right moves at the moment. Basil, Andrew, appreciate your time tonight. Thank you. Well, Catholic schools